take like 100 children, strip away their parents, their cell service, and all their usual safety nets.
Right, just completely isolate them.
Exactly. You leave them in the dense woods, and their only supervision is, easily distracted teenagers. We call this summer camp, but functionally, it's basically a temporary, lawless society.
Yeah, it really is. It's a place where the rules of the real world are just suspended.
And that makes it the absolute perfect incubator for terror.
Oh, totally. I mean, it is a brilliant setup for vulnerability. You take a demographic that's already prone to anxiety and hyperimagination.
Which is teenagers and kids, obviously.
Right. And you remove every single structural pillar that usually keeps them safe.
Which is exactly why we are plunging into this world today. Welcome to the Deep Dive, everyone.
Glad to be here.
So just 3 days ago, on August 7th, 2026, Jane Schoenbrun's highly anticipated film, Teenage Sex and Death at Camp Miasma, finally premiered.
Such a huge release.
It really was.
Yeah.
And it has completely reignited our collective cultural obsession with one very specific, very terrifying subgenre, which is the summer camp slasher.
Yeah, it's a monumental release for this specific corner of cinema, primarily because it refuses to just play the old hits, It actively questions why we love those hits in the first place.
We have a really fascinating stack of sources for you today to help figure this out. We're looking at this incredibly detailed piece of research that tracks down 5 real-world summer camps.
And these are camps that actually served as filming locations, right?
Yes, exactly. Locations for some of the most iconic horror movies in cinematic history. And alongside that, we have all the behind-the-scenes materials surrounding Camp Miasma itself.
It's a great lineup.
So our mission for you today is to explore the psychological reality of camp vulnerability. We really want to uncover exactly why these real-world locations, places built for canoeing and friendship bracelets, are so easily transformed into our deepest nightmares.
What's fascinating here is how Camp Miasma takes that exact premise and turns it into this layered meta-commentary.
Right.
Like, Jane Schoenbrun isn't just making a camp slasher. They're constructing a narrative about our societal obsession with the trauma of these spaces.
Yeah, the plot follows a young queer filmmaker, played by Hannah Einbinder, who signs on to direct the newest installment of a totally exhausted horror franchise called Camp Miasma.
She is essentially stepping into a graveyard of recycled tropes.
Literally taking over a machine that has just been churning out dead teenagers on screen for decades.
And rather than just shoot another sequel on some Hollywood backlot, she tracks down the final girl from the original film.
Right, a character named Billy, played by Gillian Anderson.
Exactly. And Billy actually lives at the real defunct overgrown summer camp where that original movie was shot.
Which is just such a creepy setup.
It really is. And as these two develop this highly charged romance, the line between the cinematic threat and reality begins to blur.
The film basically demands that you, as the viewer, look at the physical spaces where we project our fears.
Yeah, and asks what happens when the cameras turn off but the dread remains.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to truly appreciate what a modern film like Camp Miasma is deconstructing, we kind of have to look at the architectural blueprint of the genre itself.
We have to go back to the source.
Right. We have to go back to the movie that laid the foundation Schoenbrun is playing with, which is 1980's Friday the 13th.
Yeah. I mean, the undeniable grandfather of the modern woods-based slasher.
Totally. But what stands out in our sources isn't the movie itself, but how it was made. The producers knew that if they built a set on a soundstage in California, it would feel fake.
Yeah, you just can't fake the acoustics of a real forest at night.
You really can't. You can't artificially recreate that sheer oppressive distance from the nearest hospital. So they filmed the original Friday the 13th at Camp Nova Bosca.
Which was a real camp, right?
Yeah, an entirely authentic, functional Boy Scout camp in New Jersey. They didn't just want the look of a camp. They wanted the literal dirt and the genuine isolation.
And the physical geography of the space did half the heavy lifting for the director. Like, when you watch that film, you are feeling the actual geography of a place that is miles away from civilization.
And they doubled down on that strategy for the 1981 sequel. They moved production to Camp Kenmont in Connecticut, which was another fully operational summer camp.
Okay, this brings us to one of my favorite parts of the sources.
Oh, it is such an incredible anecdote, almost unbelievable. So imagine you are the owner of Camp Kenmont, a man named Lloyd Albin. Production on Part 2 has just wrapped up.
The Hollywood crew has packed up their trucks and gone back to Los Angeles.
Exactly. And you are walking your pristine, wholesome property to make sure everything is back to normal. And dangling from one of the trees in your woods is a prop version of Mrs. Voorhees' mummified, decapitated head.
Oh my God.
The crew just forgot it there.
That would be a profoundly jarring thing to stumble across while you're, planning your summer recreation schedule.
Right. But he doesn't throw it in the dumpster. He keeps it.
He just keeps it.
He keeps it. He puts this gruesome cinematic artifact in his closet for decades, and he occasionally pulls it out to terrify his real-life campers.
That is amazing.
And the crew also built the killer's dilapidated shack deep in the woods, and they just left it standing there. It became this permanent rotting fixture on the property.
So it basically became part of the local ecosystem.
Yeah.
The fictional horror physically merging with the real environment.
But this is where I find myself pushing back against the narrative a bit. If you own a functional brother-sister residential camp, your entire business model is built on assuring parents that their children will be safe.
Obviously. Safety is the whole brand.
Right. So you'd think a place like Camp Novi Boscow or Camp Kenmont would want to bury the fact that a fictional mass murderer stalked their woods. It feels like a massive corporate liability.
You'd think they'd hide it.
But instead, they lean into it. Camp Novi Boscow even offers tours of the filming locations today. Why commercialize the fact that your property is synonymous with a bloodbath?
It's so counterintuitive.
I can only assume that the danger is actually the selling point. Like they are offering a sanitized rite of passage.
You are hitting on the exact psychological mechanism that makes this genre work. It is a rite of passage. If you think about the teenage brain, it is hardwired to seek out boundaries and push past them.
Oh, for sure.
Putting a 19-year-old counselor in charge of a cabin of 12-year-olds is like putting someone with a learner's permit behind the wheel of a school bus.
That is a terrifying analogy.
But it's true. The authority figures are just as vulnerable and prone to bad judgment as the kids. And deep down, the campers know this. They know the safety net is an illusion.
And they kind of want the illusion to break, just a little bit.
They crave it. I mean, long before cameras were invented, telling terrifying tales around a fire in the dark woods was an ancient human tradition.
Yeah, testing ourselves against the dark.
Exactly. We use the darkness of the woods to test our own bravery. What Friday the 13th did was simply take that primal, ancient tradition of campfire storytelling, commercialize it, and project it onto a screen.
That makes a lot of sense.
These camps don't hide their cinematic legacy because the movies are just validating the thrill the campers are already there to find. They want to feel like they survived something wild.
But it is one thing to test your bravery against a faceless Hollywood invention, though. A guy in a hockey mask is safely contained within the realm of fiction.
Right. Jason isn't actually real.
But the horror becomes infinitely more potent when the monster isn't an invention at all, but a real threat your parents actually warned you about.
This is the shift.
Yes. That brings us to how filmmakers began weaponizing actual urban legends, moving us from the physical isolation of the camp into the psychological lore that infects these spaces.
This is where the genre evolves from a simple jump scare into something that plays on deep-seated communal trauma.
Let's look at 1981's The Burning. The filmmakers needed a fictional camp, which they called Camp Blackfoot, and they shot it across two real locations in New York, Camp Stonehaven and Camp Scouthaven.
Classic upstate New York camp vibes.
Exactly. But when it came to the killer, they didn't just invent a boogeyman out of thin air.
Well,
they pulled from a very specific, very heavy piece of New York folklore, which is the legend of Cropsey.
yeah, and for anyone outside of the Northeast, Cropsey was the ultimate cautionary tale. The story was that an escaped mental patient lived in the woods and hunted children.
Just terrifying stuff.
But the truly terrifying reality is that this legend wasn't entirely baseless.
No, it wasn't. Our sources point out that the Cropsey myth has strong historical ties to a very real, horrific figure, a man named Andre Rand.
Right.
He was an actual child kidnapper operating in Staten Island.
Yeah.
He was a genuine predator who caused irreversible trauma to a real community.
Which is incredibly heavy source material for a slasher movie.
And The Burning takes that agonizing reality and distorts it for the screen. They move the Cropsey figure away from the urban decay of Staten Island, drop him into the rural isolation of a summer camp, and transform him into a vengeful caretaker who was disfigured in a prank gone wrong.
They essentially took an urban panic and localized it into a rural nightmare.
Yeah.
And by doing that, they provided a fictional container for very real parental anxieties.
So what does this all mean for the audience? Why does twisting a real tragedy into a slasher movie work so effectively?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it acts as a cultural coping mechanism. I mean, the real world is chaotic and cruel, and child predators are a paralyzing, genuine fear for any parent sending their kid away for the summer.
Absolutely paralyzing.
You cannot easily defeat a complex sociological threat in reality, but if you turn that threat into a mythical bogeyman covered in burn scars, you give it a faith.
You make it something you can fight.
You give it rules, and most importantly, you allow the final girl to defeat it at the end of the 90-minute runtime. It proves that cinematic fiction often serves as a mask for the realities we are too afraid to face directly.
Wow, yeah. We conquer the monster on screen because we feel helpless against the monsters in the real world.
That is exactly it.
That is a brilliant way to frame it. The movie is like a safe rehearsal for real-world trauma, and those physical locations still carry that weight today. Camp Stonehaven eventually became a nature preserve, and just a couple of years ago in 2024, they held a lakeside screening of The Burning right there on the grounds.
That sounds amazing, but also terrifying.
Imagine you are sitting in the dark watching this film, surrounded by the exact trees where the movie was shot, knowing the lore is rooted in a real serial killer. That is an incredibly potent way to experience a movie.
But this blending of reality and fiction gets even more intimate. It's not just societal lore sometimes, it is deeply personal memory.
Which brings us to the bizarre, uncomfortable masterpiece that is 1983's Sleepaway Camp.
Uncomfortable is definitely the right word for that one.
This film takes the concept of camp vulnerability and turns it completely inward. The story follows a young, deeply traumatized girl named Angela who survives a boating accident and is sent to Camp Arawak.
And almost immediately, things start going wrong.
Anyone who bullies her or crosses her starts dying in incredibly violent quote-unquote accidents.
It subverts the genre by making the camp environment itself the catalyst for the violence. The social dynamics are just as brutal as the murders.
And the reason those social dynamics feel so uncomfortably real is because of the location. Sleepaway Camp was filmed at Camp Algonquin in New York.
And the director didn't just pick this randomly.
Right. Robert Hiltzik didn't just pick this place off a map. He actually attended Camp Algonquin as a child. He slept in those bunks. He walked those exact trails. He essentially used his own childhood as a scouting report.
Which fundamentally changes the texture of the horror on screen.
Exactly. It's not just pulling from memory, it's weaponizing nostalgia. If you've ever been to a sleepaway camp, you know the sensory details.
The sights, the smells.
He took the specific smell of pine needles, the suffocating trapped heat in those wooden cabins, the cruel Lord of the Flies social hierarchy in the mess hall, and he turned them all into a trap. He lulls you into this warm, familiar sense of nostalgia, and then he pulls the rug out.
Because he understood the fundamental flaw in the camp system, Hiltzik realized that the sudden, overwhelming freedom given to children, combined with the stark lack of meaningful supervision, creates an environment where morality is entirely optional.
It really is optional out there.
By grounding the fantastical violence in the incredibly mundane, recognizable behaviors of real children, the horror feels intimate. It feels like something that could actually happen to you.
It bridges the gap between what we imagine in the dark and what is actually lurking there. But, sometimes what is lurking there isn't a twisted memory or an urban legend at all.
Right.
Sometimes the dread you feel in the woods isn't psychological. It is historical.
So we are moving from the concept of a scary setting to the reality of deeply haunted ground.
Exactly. We're looking at the 2022 film Vatham, starring Kevin Bacon. Now, the premise of this movie is already terrifying before a single drop of blood is spilled.
Yeah, our sources point out it's set at an LGBTQ conversion therapy camp.
You have this systemic psychological abuse of conversion therapy acting as the baseline reality, and then an axe murderer starts stalking the grounds.
It is a phenomenal modern evolution of the genre, using a very real, very present form of systemic violence as the backdrop for slasher tropes.
But the real horror of Vatham isn't what was written in the script. It is where they chose to film it. They shot the movie at Camp Rutledge in Georgia.
And this isn't just a place that looks moody on camera.
No, not at all. Camp Rutledge has a heavily documented, very active reputation for being fiercely haunted. In fact, it was the subject of an intense investigation by the Ghost Hunters team.
Having a dual identity like that, a working film set that doubles as an active paranormal hotspot, is incredibly rare.
And we aren't talking about doors creaking or cold drafts. The paranormal investigators were called in because the actual children attending the camp were reporting terrifying, specific spectral visitations.
Kids were actually seeing things.
Yes. There are two primary entities that dominate the lore of Camp Rutledge. The first is Lewis Brantley, the 19th century patriarch of the family that originally owned the land, who is often seen patrolling the tree line.
Creepy enough on its own.
But the second is far more unsettling. It's a young boy named Ethan. Campers report that if you catch his eye in the woods, he will slowly roll a little red ball toward you.
It sounds like classic Gothic fiction, but these are real experiences being reported by children trying to enjoy their summer.
But the haunting of Camp Rutledge goes so much deeper than 19th century farmers. The history of this land is genuinely grim.
Yeah, the sources document some truly horrific history here.
Before it was a recreational camp, before it was a family farm, this land belonged to the Native American Creek people. And during the American Indian Wars, the violent displacement of the Creek people culminated in a brutal massacre right there on that soil. The bedrock of this camp is quite literally soaked in blood.
It is a devastating, inescapable reality of American geography.
Here's where it gets really interesting. When you consider a location like Camp Rutledge, a place where actual documented atrocities occurred, you have to wonder about the energy of that space.
Definitely.
Does a place with that much real-world pain subconsciously act as a magnet for horror productions? Do location scouts walk onto that property, feel the heavy, oppressive atmosphere of a massacre site, and think, yes, this is the perfect vibe for our axe murderer movie, without even knowing why it feels so eerie?
This raises an important question about our cultural blindness. We have this tendency in America to treat our wilderness as a blank canvas.
We really do. We just look past it.
We look at a forest and we just see empty space waiting for us to project a fictional story onto it. We build volleyball courts and mess halls over sites of immense historical trauma, completely ignoring the factual atrocities that occurred there.
We pave over a massacre to build a summer camp.
Precisely. And when those campers report feeling a sense of dread, or when they claim to see apparitions in the woods, we write it off as camp folklore.
Just a spooky story.
Right, but maybe it isn't a haunting in the traditional sense. Maybe it is simply the landscape refusing to be silent about the violence it endured.
Wow.
The genuine unease you feel walking through those woods at dusk doesn't come from a fictional movie set. It stems from a subconscious recognition of factual violence. When you contrast the fictional, manufactured horrors of a movie script with the permanent, inescapable tragedies of American history, the summer camp slasher takes on a totally different weight.
It's so heavy.
In these spaces, the killer in the woods isn't a guy in a mask. The killer in the woods is history itself.
The killer in the woods is history itself. That is profound. It makes the fictional slasher feel almost trivial, or maybe just like a symptom of a much deeper disease. It completely shifts how you view these recreational spaces.
It demands that you treat a walk through the woods with a lot more reverence and a lot more critical thought about what is under your boots.
It really does. So let's pull all of these threads together and look at the journey we've mapped out today. We started in the present day with the brilliant meta-commentary of Jane Schoenbrun's Camp Miasma.
Showing how filmmakers are now dissecting our obsession with these isolated spaces.
Yeah. From there, we looked at the physical isolation that built the genre, exploring how places like Camp Nobe Bosco provided the authentic, unregulated wilderness necessary for Friday the 13th.
We examined how that physical distance creates a temporary lawless society, exposing the inherent vulnerability of leaving teenagers in charge of children.
We then explored how that vulnerability is weaponized by urban legends and personal trauma. We saw how The Burning used the horrific reality of the Cropsey legend and Andre Rand to give a face to parental anxiety.
And how Robert Hiltzik used his own childhood memories to make the horror of sleepaway camp feel suffocatingly intimate.
And finally, we confronted the literal haunted history of Camp Rutledge, realizing that our fictional movie monsters are often just standing on top of the factual, historical atrocities buried in the soil.
It's a lot to think about.
So to you listening right now, the next time you find yourself packing up the car for a weekend in the woods, or you are sitting around a campfire staring into the dark tree line, take a moment to really think about the ground beneath you. Consider exactly what kind of history you are setting your tent up on, because the dirt you are sleeping on might have a much darker, much more real story to tell than anything you could ever stream on a screen.
And to leave you with one final thought to mull over, we've talked extensively today about how the terrifying magic of a summer camp slasher relies entirely on a single premise: kids being completely disconnected from their parents and the outside world.
Right, the isolation.
That lack of supervision, that inability to call for help is the engine of the entire genre. But look at the reality of youth today. With the invention of smartphones, real-time GPS tracking, and constant digital surveillance, children are never truly isolated in the woods anymore.
That's true. The safety net is always in their pocket.
So does that mean the traditional summer camp horror genre is a relic of the past, destined to die out entirely? Or, perhaps more terrifyingly, will it evolve into a new, purely psychological type of terror? A genre where you have full cell service, the SOS goes through perfectly, your parents know exactly where you are, and it just doesn't save you.
Oh, I love that concept. A world where you are hyper-connected to everyone, but completely beyond rescue. Well, that brings us to the end of our exploration today. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the muddy, deeply complicated waters of the American summer camp. Until next time, maybe double-check the history of that campground before you book, and keep an eye on the tree line.